We're all here today because we're interested in design for well-being in the built environment. When I found out I was terminally ill, I thought it would be a good opportunity to stop and think about where we've come and the progress we've made in this field. So the idea of today is, well, first of all, to have a good time, and you can get to know each other because you're all colleagues working in the same field, but also to reflect on what we've learned, and more importantly really, to decide what the priorities are for the future in going forward. In terms of my own lecture, I want to talk about my personal journey as I'm facing the end of my life, to reflect on where I've come in this field, what I think the most important lessons are. In particular, what aspects of well-being are most affected by the built environment, and then from that, what kind of places seem to be the ones that help us to flourish? What still needs to be done, and what are the priorities? What are the most important challenges as we go forward? I've filmed the lecture today because I never really know how I'm going to be from day to day. So just in case I wasn't well, I thought it would be a good idea. So it's all prepared. So hopefully I'm sitting in front of you feeling highly embarrassed. So this is about my pursuit of happiness. I decided to call this lecture The Pursuit of Happiness because this is really what I feel my life's been all about. And I've learned a lot along the way, but I'm still learning and I've got a long way to go. I've been driven by two passions in my life. The first passion was a desire to make a difference to the world, to bring happiness to people's lives and to make their lives better. I think that comes from my wonderful parents and my religious upbringing. My second passion was an absolute love of the built environment. I absolutely loved making dens in the garden. I used to do drawings of my ideal house on paper and make little Lego models. Increasingly, I was able to draw these two passions together. After all, I was only interested in environments because of the way they make me feel. So therefore, it became my ambition really to create places that made people happy, or at least help them to flourish as people. I therefore decided to become an architect. I soon realised it wasn't going to be as easy as I thought to achieve my goal. When I was training as an architect at Cambridge, I kept being told to stop thinking about people and to think of the building as sculpture, which was not really what I went into architecture for. So I became quite disillusioned. I also knew that really I didn't know what the answers were. I didn't know how to design to make someone happy. Really, you'd have to do proper research to find out what worked and what didn't. Hence, my interest turned to research. So I took up a career as a research assistant and undertook a PhD when I was about 26, 27. And then I carried on in academia, and by the time I was 30, I was able to set up a research unit called WISE, Wellbeing in Sustainable Environments. And the whole aim of WISE is to find out how the built environment affects our health and well-being. We all know that finding the answers to that question is not easy, and there are many challenges in carrying out the research. And I have to say, luckily, I was not alone in having an interest in this field, because at the same time there was an explosion of interest in this field around the world. I think there are several reasons for that, and I'll just list those now. The main one perhaps was this realisation that today's health challenges are not about infectious diseases, they're about diseases that are to some extent lifestyle related, and that means the built environment can make a difference, especially when it comes to obesity, for example. There was also an acknowledgement that it's not just physical health that matters, well-being is also important. The recession hit and people started to realise that money isn't everything, and it only affects our happiness to a certain degree. So again, the built environment came into play as an important factor in our well-being. A third important reason why this design for well-being field emerged was sustainable development. Because of climate change, people wanted to design low energy housing and buildings that were going to have less demand on our environment. But these were not going to work unless people wanted to buy into them. They wanted to live in these places. So it's important that to achieve sustainable development, you also incorporate people's desires and aspirations. Rumbling alongside this was a growing frustration with the profession of architecture, which was becoming increasingly elitist and abstract in the way it was talked about. This is an example of some writing done by architecture students. It just illustrates how difficult it is to understand what they're talking about. For example, through a timeline of rapidly accumulating architectural experiments, the project explores the experiential titillation of spatial juxtaposition and later the outcome of reusing the elements that made up those spaces in endless recombination to create an infinite variety of potential spaces for the incessantly innovating client. And I apologise to the students who wrote that, because I'm sure they were doing a very good job and this is what they were supposed to be doing, but it just illustrates how remote from our experience, our everyday experience of architecture, the study of it has become. So the next few slides are about the state of the art, or the state of the science, in design for well-being. So now there are small groups of researchers all over the world who are carrying out research on how the built environment affects our health and well-being. And many of them are here today, thankfully. Considerable progress has been made, especially in certain areas. For example, we know a lot now about how walkable our neighbourhoods are and what makes a difference when it comes to walkability. You could get your smartphone out now and look up the walk score for your neighbourhood, and it will tell you on a scale of 0 to 100 how good it is. We also know quite a lot about greenery and the effect that that has on our well-being. These are the aspects of well-being that I believe are most affected by the built environment and should get our attention when we do research. First of all, the built environment affects how we feel, whether we feel uplifted, claustrophobic, depressed. It also can affect how much we suffer stress. For example, a very noisy environment can make us very stressed. And the functionality of the environment affects our ability to accomplish the tasks we want to achieve. The built environment can also either help or hinder us when we're concentrating, and help us to recover our concentration when we lose it. And it can also help people who have mental disorders such as autism, ADHD or dementia to cope with the symptoms. The built environment can even affect how much we experience pain. And then there's physical comfort. The built environment can affect how warm or cool, whether we're warm enough or cool enough, whether we have enough light to see, and whether or not we're safe from injury. And it can also affect our satisfaction with life. If we live in an area which we feel has a high status, that can make us feel better. But there are also what I call pathways whereby the built environment indirectly impacts well-being. And I'm going to list some of those now. The most important probably is physical activity. This can be promoted or limited by the built environment. And I love the slide of the fitness centre. Obviously, if you live in a neighbourhood where there are no footways, pavements, you're less likely to walk. Or if there are escalators up to your gym, you're less likely to walk up the steps. And how much we exercise affects our well-being. It's been known now that GPs will prescribe walking as a way of overcoming depression. Social engagement is also impacted by the built environment, and that social engagement is really important for well-being. The built environment can affect whether we bump into people, our neighbours for example, and it can affect the tensions that arise in families if we can't do what we want to do in the same space. The built environment also affects privacy, and we all need privacy. It tends to be the case that unless our need for privacy is satisfied, we don't want to go out into the world and interact with others. And you can see from the picture here of the flats, We did some research some years ago which showed that if you had a flat like this with an outdoor corridor to access it, you were more likely to be depressed, holding everything else constant. And it seems to be because of the lack of privacy, because people have to walk straight past your front door and windows to get to the other flats in the block. And if your house opens directly onto the street rather than being set back slightly, you're likely to feel less private, and therefore you withdraw, and there's less community spirit in places like this. There's also a theory called biophilia, which is that there are benefits that come from just having any contact with nature. And of course, the built environment can incorporate nature to a greater or lesser extent. We can have parks nearby, but we can also have trees and greenery in the street environment. The built environment also can affect how easy it is to get to facilities or to get to work. If we have long commuting times, that's going to make us more depressed. But if you have local cafes, shops and health centres nearby, that's going to give you a better quality of life. The built environment can also affect attachment and belonging. If a place has distinctive characteristics, if it has a local character, you're more likely to feel a sense of attachment to the area, and it's thought that that feeling of attachment is important for well-being, especially for children. Importantly, the built environment can also affect safety and security. Do you feel safe going out at night? Do you feel safe walking along the streets in your neighbourhood? We all know places that seem to be dangerous, and it's something to do with the characteristics of that environment that make us feel unsafe. The built environment can also in some ways affect our competence and accomplishment. We don't always want an environment that doesn't challenge us. Sometimes we want to be challenged. So, for example, children being able to climb trees will test their physical prowess and help them to stretch their spatial skills and abilities. The built environment can also affect our autonomy and independence, and this is particularly important for older people. Most people want to stay living in their own homes for as long as possible, and whether or not you can do that depends a lot on what your home is like and what the neighbourhood beyond is like, because you don't want to be trapped in your own home. It's also important because people like to have some control over their environment. We need to be able to control the temperature and the ventilation. It makes us feel better as people. And so we have some control over autonomy and independence when we design the built environment. And finally, equality and inequality. That can affect our well-being and is influenced by the built environment. So for example, if you live in a small house amongst many large houses, you're more likely to feel unhappy than if you live in a big house amongst smaller houses. So whether we like it or not, we do live in a world of comparison, and people prefer to feel they're equal with the people alongside them. We do know now a lot more about the types of environment that are likely to make us happy or to make us flourish. And what I want to do now is give a few examples of these environments, having talked about the aspects of well-being. First of all, density. That's had a lot of attention in research, but actually it tends to be contradictory and difficult to interpret. But from reading all of the studies, what I would conclude is that relatively high densities are good because they encourage us to walk and they also encourage us to meet people. But where possible, certainly in a UK society, we should avoid high-rise living and aim for medium-rise dwellings, preferably that have their own front door onto the street, because that encourages social interaction. Wherever possible in residential areas, we should try to incorporate facilities and amenities, local shops, restaurants, cafes and pubs. But there are sometimes problems with these, so we have to have adequate sound insulation of houses from the outside so that there aren't any conflicts. The general message is to incorporate as much greenery as possible, especially in the immediate residential environment. Greenery seems to make a big difference to our well-being. And even in high-density areas, it's possible to incorporate quite a lot of greenery, even if it's just on balconies, roof terraces, on the wall itself, street trees, grass verges and so on. In terms of the street network, it's best to achieve what we call an irregular grid pattern. A grid is good because it gives you more options in terms of going from A to B, so it's quicker to get to your destination. But if you have a uniform grid, there's lots of crossroads, and that's where people with dementia tend to get lost. So we would say stagger those junctions, so we have T-junctions rather than crossroads, and make the streets curved, gently curved if you can. And that way the street gradually unfolds before you. And especially for older people, this is helpful. If you have dementia, you can lose concentration on a long straight road. But with a curving road that gradually opens up in front of you, you tend to maintain concentration and remember what you're doing and where you're going. It seems to be very important to have buffer zones or soft edges between private and public space. These are the spaces, say front gardens, which might only be 2 metres deep, where people linger, where they can chat to people going by, where they can just observe the world. And it seems to preserve privacy and at the same time encourage social interaction. When it comes to the house itself, we need to pay careful attention to the way it's designed so that the layout allows people to do what they want to do. We wouldn't necessarily recommend big open plan spaces in a large family, particularly because people need to do their own activities in private. Children need space to do homework quietly. But we would encourage people to have kitchen dining rooms, because if people have space to eat together, they're more likely to communicate and have family meals rather than just sit and watch the television. It's important, however, that all of the rooms have good sound insulation. So we need good sound insulation, not just from the outside, but between rooms. And a lot of new housing is very flimsy. Even the low energy housing is quite flimsy, and sound insulation can be extremely poor. So we need to make sure that we improve our standards. In terms of fostering a sense of safety, what we would encourage is eyes on the street. This means having as many windows as possible facing onto the street so people feel safer. There are people there if something happens. And also a clear differentiation between public and private space. In the 60s and 70s, architects experimented with different types of layout and the boundaries became blurred. And we found that this didn't work very well because nobody claimed ownership of space. They didn't know who it belonged to. And always maximise daylighting, because that makes a huge difference to our well-being. And the Victorians were brilliant at doing it. Look at any Victorian house and you'll see that it's designed all around the principle of maximising light. The kitchen extension at the back is to let light into the body of the house, and there's often skylights. You never find an internal bathroom in a Victorian house. We also need homes that are easy to keep warm and also cool in hot months. This makes a big difference to well-being, not just in terms of our physical health, but it means that we can use more of the house. I'm going to end by saying that we should design attractive buildings and spaces. It's often the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to mention attractiveness because we don't know what it means, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder anyway. But surely there must be some way of finding out what makes something beautiful. For many years we've sought to find the answer. Is it to do with proportions? Is it to do with colour? I think we need to do more research to find out what the answers are. It could be that we need to have depth in the surfaces, to have human scale details, to use images which have good associations, say with holidays and homes, or use natural materials and greenery. But I think when it comes down to it, whether or not we feel happy in an environment depends to a large extent on how attractive it is. So we need to find out what that means. So now we come to the future of design for well-being. In pursuing happiness through the built environment, what are the priorities for the future? First of all, I think we need to do research that focuses on quality rather than quantity. For a long time, we've used quite crude measures of the built environment. So, for example, does the amount of green space affect our well-being? It matters what that space is like. So does it matter if it's trees or grass? Does it have to be enclosed? Is it better in our immediate environment or in a park? We need to know more about the qualities of space that make a difference to our well-being. I've already said we need to do more research on attractiveness. There's big gaps in our knowledge there. We need to do longitudinal research, before and after research, because that seems to be the best way of finding out how a built environment affects people. And to do that, we really need close links with industry. If we know a large-scale development's about to happen, we can go in and survey residents before and after. Most importantly, we need to focus on how we use the evidence that we do have in practice. And I think there are two main ways this can be done. The first is publicly through government intervention. For health reasons, the government could decide to spend money on built environment interventions. For example, planting more trees or installing more benches. But maybe that's unlikely to happen. But I think more importantly, we should focus on the private development of the built environment and how we can influence that. And I think what we need to do is offer more incentives to developers and to educate consumers to be more demanding. And there are two ways in which we can do that. One is through what I've called a Design for Wellbeing kite mark, and the other is a What Not to Live In personal tool or application. If we buy food in the supermarket, we know what we like to eat, but we also know what's good for us. And we can look at the packaging to see how much fat, salt, calories and so on there are in the food we want to buy. And we can make an informed decision. But when we buy or rent a house, probably the biggest purchase of our lives, we know so little about how it's going to impact our well-being. We have energy ratings, we can see how structurally sound the building is, but what we really need is a rating of how good this house is for our well-being. I don't know how that's going to look, but it could be something that has several different domains. For example, it could have a score for how good it is for a sense of community, for privacy, for walkability, child friendliness, general happiness and so on. I think if we knew more about the housing we were buying, it would make developers sit up and listen and say we need to improve the quality of our stock. But we have to bear in mind that what may be good for one person may not be for another, and it depends on our personality and where we are in our life cycle. So for example, what may suit us when we're young and single may not be what's appropriate when we have a family. In the same way as a pencil skirt may suit certain people but not others. So what I think we need to do is develop a tool which enables people to put in information about themselves, their personality, their desires, their stage in life, and from that it will tell them what they need to look for, what the priorities are for them in looking for a house. Is it plenty of light? Is it a big garden? Is it a central location? But beyond the kite mark and the What Not to Live In app, I think we can be even more visionary. I have students that come up to me after I teach them my module, and they say to me, I've been so inspired by this module, how can I do this as a career? And I don't really know what to say to them at the moment, but perhaps what we need is a new profession for this very special expertise. The expertise is in knowing how the built environment affects our health and well-being, but beyond that, and in being able to advise on how to create places that are better for us. I don't know what we might call this new professional, but perhaps it could be the Building and Urban Design Doctor, the BUD. So back to the pursuit of happiness, and I want to get more personal now. I'm really proud of what we've achieved in the field of design for well-being in the built environment, but I'm perhaps more proud in my life of my relationships with my husband, my children, my friends, my colleagues and my family. When I found out I was terminally ill, one of my first thoughts was, damn, all I wanted to do was make everybody happy, and here I am, I'm going to make everyone extremely sad. I almost wished I had no friends or family or kids. But actually it's taught me that life is actually about more than happiness, or perhaps well-being is more than happiness. We all want to be happy and to flourish, but I think to live life to the full means experiencing the whole range of human emotions. And it's okay to be sad sometimes. And I know my kids will be sad when I'm gone, but I know that they won't be sad all the time or forever. They won't be stuck in that sadness. So I want to end by passing on to you what I have learnt more recently about the pursuit of happiness. So in my pursuit of happiness, I sought to make other people happy, and I think that was my first mistake, because actually I think we should put our own happiness first. And it feels almost sacrilegious saying that, but actually, if you think about the people you like spending time with, are they the worthy people, the self-righteous people? No, they're the people who know how to have fun, how to enjoy themselves, and they give off that joy to other people. So I think it's almost our duty, really, to seek our own happiness first and foremost. What brings you joy? What makes you happy? I think we should all think and go home after today knowing the things that make us happy. So is it reading a book, going for a walk? For me, it's watching true movies. So think about what makes you happy and make sure that each day you spend some time on those pleasures. It's not selfish to put yourself first, because I think we can only give to others when we are for ourselves first. And also, I think we all need to know that we're perfect as we are. And I don't mean by that that we all have perfect behaviour and we never make mistakes, because of course we do. But I think that we're all unique and we have a unique set of characteristics that makes us who we are. And that is perfect. We are all meant to be how we're meant to be. And so it's important that we all know what those characteristics and strengths are. And there are ways of finding out. If you don't know what your strengths are, there are questionnaires you can do to find out. Because I think it's important that we play to our strengths. And I know you've probably heard this before, but I think we do need to appreciate the little things every day. And what I try to do is appreciate at least 3 things each day. What was good about today? And you can think of at least 3 things, and it makes you so much more grateful for life. And then another point I want to make is that whenever we feel down, it's usually a thought we have about a situation, not the situation itself. And we can change our thoughts. We may not be able to change the situation, but we can change our thoughts about that situation, which means that actually we can reframe our thoughts to be more positive ones. And I think in most situations that can stop us feeling down. Because even though I'm in a difficult situation now, being ill, I can actually honestly say that I feel more peaceful and happy than I ever have done before. I think it's important when you have a spare moment not to focus on that bad thing that happened, but to try and recreate a joyful feeling. Try and remember when you had some success at work or when you had a romantic moment at home, and recreate the feelings that you had then. Because what you focus on, you get more of. I also think it's important that we know and understand that social skills are central to our success in life, especially if you have children. I think it's important that you teach them, because I think it's possible to learn. I think anybody can learn to make good relationships, and it's our responsibility as parents to teach our children to have good relationships. And then finally, I always felt slightly guilty loving beautiful things, felt it was not valuable, it was superficial, but I can honestly say I believe now that beauty is important and that our environments do affect us. I don't know how long I have left to live, but I intend to make the most of every moment. And for me, that means continuing to work for as long as I can, because I still feel passionate about this field. I don't think I was wrong to think we could make a difference. I do believe that we have the knowledge and expertise to influence the creation of places and spaces that truly help people to flourish now and in the future. The pursuit of happiness, it is not in vain.